Dismiss our children at this time, and we are so thankful for those who minister to them and for God giving us children. So, praise the Lord. Sometimes times of worship make me a little speechless. So, pardon me if I get myself together for a minute after reflecting on the beauty of the Lord. We're in Acts chapter 15 this morning, Acts chapter 15. And last week we looked at the subject, church fights. Church fights, doctrinal edition. And we realized that most church fights don't happen over doctrine. Most church fights happen because people think that their preferences are doctrine. Whether the pulpit is wooden, plexiglass, or a round table. And they will fight over those very things and sometimes even leave churches. I've known people to leave the church over the type of pulpit that was up front. People get upset about music, whether it's traditional, whether it's contemporary, whether it's Southern gospel, whether it's blended. I mean, all kinds of things that people take and they make their preferences doctrine. The Bible is doctrine. What I like, what you like, what I like or dislike, what you dislike, that's just preference. We all have opinions. And do you know, if we decided that we were going to try to cater to everybody's opinions in this room, we might as well shut her down. Amen? That's truth, right? Because there is no way that we're going to please everybody. But we have a charge to please one and one only, and His name's Jesus. So I think aiming to please Him is the perfect thing to do. And I had to set my mind very early in ministry. I could try to poll the crowd and then try to please them. And I've even found this. You try to please one person, and you might be successful for 1 minute, and then later on in the day, they'll get grumpy and they won't like what you did that they liked earlier. But anyway, that's another sermon. Today is Church Fights, Personal Disputes edition. Personal Disputes edition. I wish that personal disputes were just things that I could take and say, well, you know, that's just his opinion, that's just her opinion, and not take it to heart sometimes. But I'm going to give you a transparent moment as a pastor. And I know you as well. If you have feelings, if you have emotions, and you get into a personal dispute, especially with somebody that you've known for a long time, and then you have a dispute, and then you end up parting ways, that can be painful. So today we're going to look at a personal dispute that took place in the book of Acts, chapter 15, starting in verse 36. I'm going to read these few verses and then try to highlight some things. There's not a whole lot that's said in these few verses about this dispute. We know the reason why. We know the end result. But there's a lot of stuff in between the lines that I want us to consider. Because I believe every single one of us has had a dispute with somebody at some point in time. Even those of us who don't like conflict, we can't avoid it. So we're going to have a dispute with somebody along the way. Now we might not like to duke it out like those who love conflict, but we all have them. So let me read these verses, Acts 15, starting in verse 36. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord, and see how they're doing." Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark. But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed. being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. If you're note takers, two main points this morning in outlining this message. The first point we're going to look at are the characters of the story. The characters of the story. And there are three characters, and you want to leave some room underneath these three characters. The first character is Paul. The second character is Barnabas. And the third character is John Mark. Now, Silas is there, but we're not going to really address him today because he just happens to be the add-on that you'll see more about later on. So the characters, Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. And then the second main point are the lessons of the story. And there are 4 lessons that I'll give you in just a moment. So let's start looking, first of all, at Paul. Let's go back to verse 36. It says, "Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, 'Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they're doing.'" The first thing about Paul is that he cared about the believers he had invested in. Paul had planted several churches already in the first missionary journey. And Paul was not, wasn't the type to say, okay, I've got this church started, we've got the groundwork laid, so now we're just going to go and leave these people, these new believers, on their own. That was not the way Paul operated. And that's not the way we're supposed to operate. We're not supposed to lead somebody to Christ and then say, okay, well, you're on your own now. Best of luck to you. When we start that initial investment into the life of a believer, we need to stick with them and help them grow. That's God's plan. It's in the Great Commission. Lead them to Christ, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all the things I've commanded you. So, Paul, he cared about the believers he invested in so much that he wanted to inspect how things were going. So he said to Barnabas, paraphrased here, let's go back and visit and see how these people are doing. So he believed and cared about them enough to go back and inspect. But then he cared enough about them to protect them. Let's see how the story continues. Verse 37 says, "Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark." And I'll say more about that in a minute. "But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone to the work." You know, some people might read this and say, well, what would it have hurt for Paul to say, Barnabas, hey, let's go ahead, let's bring John Mark along with us. He could have been a nice southern gentleman and said, well, that's all right. I'm going to say something just a minute. You notice in the South, now our church is a little more blended. We've got people from Midwest, western part of the country. We got people from a little further north. So we're a little more of a melting pot for this part of South Carolina. But we've got an interesting mix of personalities. And, for those of us who have been raised in the South, we would have probably thought to ourselves, I don't really want John Mark going. He's kind of a quitter, but it'll be all right, Barnabas. Sure. And we bite our tongue, and deep down, we would go months into the journey wishing he hadn't gone along with us. I don't know why they call that Southern hospitality. It's outright lying. Let's just be truthful. But we've been taught we need to be kind and not say what's on our mind. But Paul was a little more direct. he insisted that they not take him because he had already left the journey and he might likely do it again. The second missionary journey was going to be a little more intense, so they decided that they were going to Paul decided that they weren't going to take John Mark because he probably couldn't handle it. So, some might have thought Paul's being a jerk here. But it was all for their protection. He didn't want John Mark's quitting to maybe lead to others quitting. But let's look now at the second character, Barnabas. Let me back up for just a minute. Let's see how things continue with Paul. Verse 39, then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. So obviously, Paul had some pretty intense feelings, but guess who else had some pretty intense feelings too? Barnabas. Paul believed a certain way, and he was not going to budge. Barnabas believed a certain way, and he was not going to budge. So rather than just, trying to put up with each other's differences, it was time to part ways. I began to ask some questions in my mind, and I'm going to think out loud for a minute. Sometimes those of us who are more direct and more prophetic and more tell it like it is kind of people, we don't have a softer side. Or maybe if we do have a softer side, it's not one that we show very much. And if we do show it, we normally remind people that, hey, I'm doing you a favor by showing you my softer side, so you better write this on the calendar because you might not see it again for a while. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about, and some of you are the ones that have that harsher side. I remember, I'm going to tell this, when I first met several of you in the interview process here in coming to this church, I realized we have a lot of what I call prophet mouths. We have a lot of people who are very direct, and you don't have to ask them what they're thinking because they're going to tell you. And so it took me, and I realized we had some encouragers in the room too, and some people that have that balance. But, it's interesting how God takes all of us with our different gifts and brings us together. But I began to think this about Paul. Was the preacher of grace not so quick to extend grace? Now, that may be just a matter of opinion, but I'm going to take and preach with it for a moment. Some of us, we all about that grace. And we love receiving the grace of God, but when it comes time to extend the grace of God to other people, that's a different story. We love that grace flowing down that covers us. But then when it comes time to extend that grace to other people, especially the down and out and the ones that drive us insane, that's a different story. Just a point to ponder. So, tuck that back, if you would. Well, now let's look at Barnabas. Paul was the direct one. Barnabas was the encourager, and I can relate with him a little more. I'll talk about that in a minute. But Barnabas was the encourager. He was very patient with people. We already know in verse 36 that Paul said, let's go and let's go back and encourage these people and see how they're doing, the ones we've already invested in. And now in verse 37, Barnabas was determined to take with them John Mark. We already see in verse 38 that Paul didn't want to do it because John Mark had quit. He left. We'll say more about John Mark in a minute. But Barnabas looked at this guy and he said maybe he's worth giving a second chance. He was patient. He looked beyond the faults of John Mark. He looked beyond the fact that he just left them high and dry back in Acts 13. And he said, let's give him a second chance. And Paul's like, nah, strike one, he's out. At least that's how it appeared. Paul had, I'm sure, things, as I said, he wanted to protect the people, and he was afraid that John Mark might go astray. But it comes across that just maybe Paul was being judgmental and Barnabas was being gracious. But the thing about Barnabas is he was willing to choose his belief in someone's potential over somebody else's criticism of somebody. Very often, about every other month, I go and preach at Home with the Heart. And many of you are familiar with the ministry. It's a men's recovery ministry. And when I was preparing for this message, I couldn't help but think about these guys. And tonight I'll have the opportunity to preach to them again. But these are guys who, they have been strung out and addicted to all kinds of things. They tell me that probably 9 out of 10 that come into Home with a Heart struggle with a meth addiction. And so many times I hear that these guys haven't been in the program just one time. Some of them have been in 5, 10 times. And Alex Ritchie, who's their director, he keeps giving them a chance over and over. And for some of those guys, the 8th chance, it finally sticks. Some of you have been, I know Al has worked with Haven Arrest, and some of you have been involved in some capacity with Haven Arrest. You've probably seen the same thing. You see guys coming in over and over and over, and you think, are they ever going to get straight? Are they ever going to get clean? And then finally, one day, it clicks. It clicks. Barnabas was willing to overlook the fault and give John Mark one more chance. We need people like Paul in the church because they're the ones who give those direct words that we frequently need. You think about when David was, when he had committed a sin with Bathsheba. That thing, Nathan came along and said, "Thou art the man." He was the prophet that helped David get back on track. We need people like Paul, but we need people like Barnabas too. People who encourage. But what do we do with people like John Mark? A lot of times we say, oh, he's a quitter. He's a wuss. He's not going to amount to anything. He's got good intentions, but when the pressure gets on, that boy goes running. What good is he in the work of God? Go back to Acts 13. Hold your place here for a minute. Acts 13. This is where John Mark made his exodus and made Paul mad. Acts 13:13. It says, "Now when Paul and his party set sail from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia, and John, departing from them," John Mark, "returned to Jerusalem." Many think that this was homesickness. Things got a little tough. He missed home. He decided, hey, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to go back. I just can't handle it. I can't handle being away. I can't handle the pressure. This Jesus stuff, this missionary journey stuff, planting churches, is just too intense for me. So I can't handle it anymore. I am gone. More than likely, that's probably what happened. There are a lot of speculations as to other things, other reasons why. But I think it was fear. I think he was afraid. And he, like a lot of other believers, probably didn't count the cost. Because truthfully, You know, when we enter the Christian life, we're not thinking about the cost of being a disciple. We don't think about taking up the cross daily and following Him. That stuff is far from our minds. And then I have seen so many people. That's why when I see a new believer, I pray heavily for them, because so many times Satan comes in and he begins to bring on the pressure, and all of a sudden they flake out. We need to be praying for people who are new in the faith, or maybe struggling in the faith. But John Mark quit. And Paul, because John Mark quit, didn't want him back on this journey. But we already saw that Barnabas was willing to give him a second chance, and this time it stuck. This time it stuck. I'm not going to have us look here, but in 1 Peter chapter 5, there toward the close, verses 12 and 13, it actually makes mention of Mark and the fact that he was involved in ministry sometime after Barnabas gave him the chance to go with them. The sad part about it is Paul and Barnabas couldn't seem to work this thing out. They had two very strong, differing opinions, and they decided to go their separate ways. I'm going to give you the lessons, and then I'm going to come back to something very important about John Mark. Lesson number one, while the dispute wasn't ideal, the gospel spread further when the two separated. Because now, rather than Paul and Barnabas, now it's Paul and Silas and Barnabas and John Mark. So now you've got two going one way, two going another, and the potential of the gospel getting to the ends of the earth is even greater. But then, I want to give you a second lesson. People go further when somebody believes in them. Maybe you're here this morning because somebody didn't give up on you. You were at the bottom of the barrel, you were at the end of your rope, and somebody said, he's worth believing in. She's worth believing in. And they kept sticking with you. As hard-headed and as difficult as you were, they stuck with you. I've got a friend of mine, he's like that. He stuck with me through thick and thin. His favorite words are, Matthew, do you want to go out for breakfast? My favorite response is yes. But so many people have said this about Howard, that Howard, you're the only friend I've got. Because he's willing to stick with the down and out, the ones that, their spouses give up on them, everybody else gives up on them, and Howard's still taking them out to breakfast. Let them know, brother, I love you. I'm glad he did that for me and for so many others. Here's a big one. Failure is neither fatal nor final. Failure is neither fatal nor final. For John Mark, let me ask a what if. What if Barnabas would not have given John Mark that chance? What if he had said, oh, he's a loser. He's no good. Just let him go. How would John Mark's story have ended? Would he have had the impact in the lives of people that he ended up having? Just thinking out loud here. But another lesson, just because you took a wrong turn or were forced to because of somebody else's decisions, that does not mean that God can't write a beautiful ending to your story. Just because you took a wrong turn. Or maybe you had to take a wrong turn because something that somebody else did to you affected you so badly. That doesn't mean that God can't write a beautiful ending to your story. Turn to 2 Timothy 4 as we close out. 2 Timothy chapter 4. should have marked my place there because y'all are going to get to it faster than I am. 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul was upset over John Mark so much that he stood his ground. John Mark's not going with us. Barnabas stood his ground and said, Paul, I believe God wants John Mark, so if I have to go alone, we're parting ways. There were two men with very strong convictions. And Paul, I'm glad the story doesn't end where it seems to leave off in Acts 15. Because now in 2 Timothy 4, Paul is at the end of his life. He is facing execution, and he's giving these final thoughts. Have you ever noticed that when people are facing death, they really start contemplating a lot of things? I saw it over and over again with hospice patients, with hospice families. I mean, things, old business coming out that they knew they had to deal with. And I think Paul was addressing maybe some old business. But I want to back up to verse 6 of 2 Timothy 4. It says, For I am already poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I mean, Paul was feeling it. He's like, my death is coming any moment. And I'm already feeling just as if I'm dead. But he makes these awesome statements about his life. And I pray that every single one of us in this room, everyone who will watch or listen to this message, can come to the end of our life and say this in verse 7. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved His appearing. And now here he begins to wrap up. And he says, Be diligent to come to me quickly. For Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed for Thessalonica. Crescens for Galatia, Titus for Dalmatia. Have you ever noticed when you're going through a tough time in life, it's hard to find friends? They're willing to hang out with you when you're a lot of fun, but when you're down in the dirt, they're going to leave you in the dirt. They might send you a text every now and then, but Paul says, only Luke is with me. Now lean in and get this next part. Get Mark, John Mark, and bring him with you. Why? For he is useful to me for ministry. The guy that quit, the guy that left them in Pamphylia and didn't continue on the journey, this guy is now useful to Paul for ministry. Failure is not fatal. Failure is not final. I want to read these lyrics to a song called The Father's House. And I'll close with this. Sometimes on this journey I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over. My story's just begun. And failure won't define me because that's what my Father does. Arrival's not the end game. The journey's where you are. You never wanted perfect. You just wanted my heart. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. A failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Prodigals come home. The helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors fling wide. The dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place. The cynical find faith. And love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho walls are quaking. Strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. So lay your burdens down here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door because it ain't welcome anymore here in the Father's house. I think if there's a song, there are a lot of songs that embrace what God has called Oasis Church to be, but I think these lyrics so well say, this is God's house. And this is the place where people need to realize their story can have a different ending. They will come to us broken. They will come to us ready to quit. They will come to us in all kinds of messes. And we can say, oh, well, clean yourself up. Or we can come alongside them and help them. I want to give a few appeals. For those of you who are like Paul, you're those direct people. It's easy to be critical, but I just want to challenge you to balance that with grace. To those who are like Barnabas, you're the encouragers in the room. You're going to be criticized because people are going to say you're light and you're weak and all of that, but keep standing for the marginalized. Keep cheering on the people that keep acting like they're lost because they are lost, and keep cheering them on and keep sharing the gospel and keep trusting that one day, it may take decades, but they will be saved. And to those who are like John Mark, and there may be more in this room than I think, you feel like life's over. You feel like I have just made a series of bad choices, and I mean, life just stinks. And I'm just ready to go home. There's nothing for me anymore. My life's been a series of heartaches, and I'm just tired of it. I'm here to tell you, just like John Mark, life isn't over. You still have a chance. Chance to be saved. Chance to brush off and try again. For us, whatever category we're in, my prayer is that we'll be the church that reaches out, that believes in those that everybody else has given up on. I'm not saying it's an easy journey. It gets messy. But it's worth it. It pays off. You don't believe it? John Mark's living proof. Personal disputes. Sometimes they look rough on the outside, but they can turn out all right. Maybe you're in a personal dispute right now, or you have had a personal dispute that's years old, and you parted ways with somebody. I don't know what God's saying to you in this moment, but I just want you to do business with God. So if you would bow your heads, close your eyes. I'll ask Caleb if he'd come and just play softly in the background. I'm going to ask a question. Nobody's looking around. How many of you would say, Matthew, I see myself in this message one way or another? You might be Paul, you might be Barnabas, but you might be John Mark that just feels like everything's just done. Would anybody say, Matthew, I see myself in this sermon? Many of you. God bless you. God bless you. I want to pray for you. And then I want to give room for just a moment. If anybody needs to come pray, maybe you're like John Mark. I know I've hit it at a lot of different angles today, but I really want to park on the John Marks in the room. to think that there is no second chance. Maybe somebody years ago said some negative things to you, and you just think that there's no such thing as better. There's hope. There's a second chance, there's a 15th chance, there's a 115th chance. God, I pray. I don't know how you're speaking in this room. Whatever people need to do in this moment, God, I pray they would. They need to come pray, or if they need to pray with me, or whatever the case is, we're just going to leave some room for just a minute. Father, thank you that no matter what happens, disputes that arise, no matter what happens, you can take things just like what we saw here in Acts 15 and turn things around. God, I believe that every single one of us in this room is a story of a life you turned around. I would dare say that many of us, when we trusted Christ, we didn't do it the first time we heard the gospel. Statistically, they say most people don't until they've heard it for the 7th time. Some of us, it might have been more, some less. But God, I'm glad you didn't say, okay, one chance, you're done. You've been gracious to us. So gracious. Help us to extend that grace to others. So, Father, whatever lasting truth that you want for us to take and live out this week, I pray we would. God, we love you. We give you praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Probably one of my favorite stories in Scripture. And I pray that God is using it in some way to be of help to you. Well, thank you for being here, and we look forward to next Sunday when we can be back together again. Y'all have a wonderful week, and God bless you all.